most families, they think about financial health as a number, and it's so much more than that. Speaking from my own experience, I have been on a journey with my own dad, Mike, for about 15 years as he's lived with Alzheimer's and aged in place. And what I've realized is financial health is really more about choice. It's about how we choose to live, what we choose to do, who we do that with. And I think the cruel thing about not thinking about financial health early enough is it often means that there's a crisis. And on the other side of that, realizing that families like mine don't have as much choice as we would have liked. And so that is what we are here to talk about today. I am joined here by two incredible trusted network members at tendercare, the front door for elder care. That's Dan Henderson from Assisted Living Locators in Scottsdale and Zahya Beall of Damefender Financial Partners. Welcome both.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for being here. I would love to just hear a little bit from both of you, Dan, Z, on what it is that you do today for families. Dan, why don't we start with you?
Okay, well, we are a placement service. A lot of the world doesn't know we exist, which is part of my goal in getting out there and sharing that, we are a service that can help families when they get to the point where they need to look at long-term care, whether that is assisted living, independent living, nursing homes. That's what we do. We know the facilities, we know, we're your industry experts, if you will. To help guide families to the right resources and help them make an informed decision. And, it's really gratifying to get to help families. Oftentimes, they're in a state of crisis. It's not a fun process for them necessarily, but overwhelmingly, at the end, they always tell us something, very similar. They all say something along the lines of, I don't know how we could have done this without you guys. And that's really what, keeps us engaged in doing what we do. So.
That's great. That's great. Z.
Yeah. So to jump off what Dan was sharing, we really look at a household and a family with a through line. And to your point, money, it's not just about the dollar amount or number. Financial health is really about choices. And that's actually why we founded Damefender on this concept of we are, as Damefender, your defenders of your choices and your future. And we understand that planning is really helpful to do in advance because there's not only a lot of ways to save money, but there's also ways to transfer risk and bring different team members in that can help offload and reduce a lot of the risk that you're carrying today. So we work with families, but we really start with that financial planning piece, which drives everything, including investments, but then sometimes insurance, pensions, etc. And then, of course, long-term care planning. What I found was actually kind of interesting, if I could just quickly share how we got focused on this area, which I think is unique. In 2013, one of the things that my firm, I was working on Wall Street at the time, had me do was go out and train financial advisors to talk about the longevity stage and how do you help clients understand those options for housing, whether you're aging in place or moving. And I think what's interesting is 2013, that's now 13 years ago. And I still see so few advisors talking about this. And actually, there's a study from AARP that says a lot of times advisors pass these clients along when they start to see these signs, which I find really unfortunate. And I think that that's where we really strive, is defending our clients, their futures. And specifically, we have a mission, DAME is in the name, to help women, but really it's about helping the vulnerable. And we see our seniors this way as well.
That's so powerful. And I would love to actually start there. I hear a lot in communities of caregivers that often it's actually the money that knows first before there is a significant change or a cognitive decline. And I'm just curious, if you are seeing that or have seen that in this industry, like what signs to look for in finances, if you're starting to suspect there might be some early cognitive decline that's happening.
Yeah, I think that's where the advisor role becomes really important. And as we continue to see the next generation behind the first group of parents to go through this real long-term care crisis as we're aging longer, I think now you're starting to see people asking these questions earlier and earlier. But ultimately, I think what we're trying to put perspective to is that, yes, if you do wait, there is going to be potentially a major financial impact where I think an advisor really comes in, and the clients that we're working with is that we can help to notice signs sooner. Ultimately, I think one of the reasons kids have a hard time potentially catching this is either they may be too close to the parent, and so they don't notice those minor changes. We know that also from the AARP study, but also when they're remote, it's hard to be as intact. Where a financial advisor, a normal course of a retiree and advisor working together, we're talking pretty frequently, at the least annually. And so we have access to different parts of their life and different behaviors and interactions than a child probably will ever have with their parent. So in that way, we really have a key role to pick up on those signals. And I'll tell you, I think it's interesting you mentioned that tagline from AARP, the checkbook knows first. There's really 3 different types of clients. We have clients that plan with us and never have an issue, clients that plan with us and then eventually do end up needing to use that plan we put in place, and those that come in crisis. And it's actually that second group, my client that I was working with for 2 years, she really was trying to tackle whether to leave her home or go to assisted living. She understood the risk of staying home is that she would be alone, and that she was really worried no one would know that she wasn't okay for long periods of time if something happened. But when she did make the move to assisted living, it actually sparked a little bit of her dementia and cognitive decline. So that week she called every day for 5 days to confirm what we told her on Monday, which is we did receive a check that she sent. So that's really when we had that trigger point to pull in compliance in our home office, who specialize in how to deal with this, and then bring in the son, who was the trustee, to work with him on how we could help mom navigate forward.
That's amazing coordination. And I feel like most families, they don't actually have that outcome or that story. I know even in my own experience, it's just awkward to have the conversation. I never wanted to talk about finances with my dad. That was his own space, part of, his own private information. And I'm just curious. We hear this all the time from families. Like, how do I even begin? It feels weird. I don't want them to be upset that I'm kind of getting nosy. And, what is the conversation you wish more families, especially if you're working with, daughters, you're working with, spouses, would be able to prompt, and, any advice you have for doing that?
Yeah, I think there's 2 things. I often hear from younger clients, and by younger, they could be anywhere from 30, 40 to the adult, well-aged children that are 50, 60. How do I even tackle this? And what I try to say is flip the script. Tell them at the next holiday that you are working on all this stuff for yourself, and watch your parents get interested in being nosy about your business. And that really is a really nice backdoor way to get a sense on how they view all of these things, because you'll get some of that opinion during that discussion. The hope is that it actually unveils some really good content and questions. And I think then the second piece is why it's so important to write these things down. Things are real on paper, and I cannot tell you how many times I've seen that paper plan act as a benchmark for a spouse or family to say, oh, I didn't know that's how you were planning on spending retirement. So it really does help to guide a stronger discussion around what's real and making plans for it. And a lot of times that's actually exciting, and being able to tell clients, yes, you can afford to do that. But I think the final piece is, even for us, at times, I think clients write this plan out and they have to recognize that they are still very much fractured on what they want to do, and putting it on paper helps them to start really thinking through those decisions. Do you stay where you are or move with the grandkids? And what is the impact of that and moving states for your finances and everything else? So that's what that conversation generally looks like. And I would say this one other piece, because I know a question that we've talked about a lot is like, how do you not have it be awkward? I tell my team this all the time. It's not weird if you don't make it weird. So I think really just the expectation that this is important to help me with my future, and really that perspective of sharing what I'm trying to do, what advice would you give me, can bring up that
Flip the
conversation.
script is such a great takeaway. I think most of us lead with trying to get that information, and you're right, coming in and being more from a position of sharing is a great way to do it. I did not do that. I went out to lunch, a series of lunches with my dad, which kind of helped. I leaned on the appetizers to help with some of the awkwardness around this. I think it would have been great if I had started with my own plan. I'm curious, Dan, what's the difference? You're serving so many families, probably across the spectrum of planning and not planning. When you get a call from a family that has a plan already, that's gone through a lot of the questions that Z's mentioned, how does that differ from one that hasn't when you're on the other side of a diagnosis or a crisis?
It's night and day. It's black and white. The difference is, the families that have done the planning, that have had the discussions, that have, that know what their loved one wants and needs, and those are so much easier on everybody, including the client, the senior, just because it's not, for us, it's not all about the financial. It's, there's so many other aspects that go into long-term care. And, one of those is, and I think Z touched on it, is, where does it make sense for them to be? Like, do they want to be close to the daughter that's in Phoenix, or do they want to be near the son that's in Denver? So there's those kind of discussions. Do they want to be in a community? Do they want to be in a group home? What makes sense based on their lifestyle, their care needs? So, the folks that have had those discussions and that are proactively looking at what options there are, what's the cost difference between the Denver market and the Phoenix market? And that can vary greatly. I mean, those kind of things, it really makes a difference. And the families, what we find, the families that haven't had the discussions, haven't done any planning, the biggest thing that they miss out on is choice. They're usually limited then on options because they have to move quickly. And anytime in this industry, when you have to move quickly, your choices and options are limited. So that's probably the biggest impact is really, they have to take what's available at that time when they don't plan. And when somebody's in the hospital or in skilled nursing recovering from a situation that happened, then it's too late to really have those discussions. The families are often trying to figure out, and we get this more than I'd like to admit, but we talk to kids and we ask, one of the first questions we ask is, who's the POA, right? Who's the POA for your mom and dad? And
power of attorney, right?
They don't know. They don't know who the POA is. They don't know if mom or dad has a POA. They don't know if mom or dad has an advance directive and a will, how much money they make, or what their income is. And so, then they're scrambling, they're trying to figure it out. They're digging through mom and dad's, file cabinet and desk and checkbook, and you can kind of see the writing on the wall that it's difficult to make informed decisions when you're in that mode. So
yeah, it's a giant, scary treasure hunt. We don't often think about what we don't know until we realize just how much we don't know. It's one of the things I'm so proud of the team at tendercare for offering all families. We call them vaults. You can download the app. It gives you a full list based off of a few quick intake questions of what are the most important, essential information you're going to need to carry with you. This could be anything from Medicare numbers to, passwords to get into mom's phone or computer if you need to. These are not things that we think about all the time. It's really important. And even just familiarizing ourselves with things like power of attorney. Most adult children, this is like the first time they're really confronting that. And I think even some of the things that you've shared, Dan, around timing it's the first time families understand. Like, these choices are not all just ready to go when you make some of these decisions. And Z, what I'm hearing from you is actually it takes some time even to align. If there's not a plan, and now you've got multiple family members trying to figure out what the options are, and you don't have alignment yet, and you're also on the other side, what sounds like sometimes dealing with vacancy and options and how much time it takes to actually move through some of these things when you might not have much time to make these choices. It makes total sense why this becomes a much more stressful experience than it needs to if these conversations happen much sooner. I'm curious, Dan, I wonder if you can share a little bit about your own history as, an adult son. You've gone through this on your end of kind of walking through what it's like with your own family. What are some of the things as an, professional, but also as a son yourself that you would share with other families that you've now earned?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think, one of the things when I wasn't in this business when I went through this with my parents. And that's part of the reason that I'm in this business today is it really impacted me and, just seeing the need for what we do and how much it can, benefit a family. But when we were going through it, I think that, I was lucky to have, I have 3 brothers and we were all highly involved and kind of split the work, divided and conquered. But we were all kind of looking at, in terms of like the shiniest, nicest place was going to be the best place, right? And that's not always the case. And what I've learned is because we ended up moving my parents 3 times when they went into from the first assisted living to and until where they ended finally. But it wasn't necessarily the nicest, fanciest place that had the best care, and that's what we see in this business today. Is that it's not necessarily the nicest, fanciest place. And so what we try to tell clients when we're touring them, and this really is easy to share my personal experience with them, is that you got to look at things like is the staff engaged? Are they happy? Do they appear to be like enjoying their work? Are they engaged with the residents? Are they, are they, saying hello to them as they pass them in the hallway and know their name? Those are things that really stand out to me when I'm touring. Cleanliness, that's a big one. And, that doesn't necessarily, that doesn't need to be in the nicest place. And, so I always look for cleanliness, and I recommend that they look at that. And, how long has the staff been there? Talk to the caregivers. Like, if caregivers have been at a facility for, 5, 10, 15 years, it's a good facility. They don't stay there and if it's not a good facility, and they don't typically have that kind of longevity if they're not good caregivers. So that's always a good sign to me. And the other thing that I've learned both with my parents, and part of the reason why we moved them, is facilities can change. They can change, very quickly. And what could be a very good facility today could have, major staffing change that takes place. It could change ownership. There's a variety of things that can happen that can just change the dynamics, and that facility could, can really go downhill quickly in those situations sometimes. And so I think that's the other thing we try to tell folks. Our goal is to place somebody one time. We don't want them to have to move. But if a facility isn't meeting their needs, then it's important to find another facility that does meet their needs and where they can get the care, that they're paying for and that they deserve. So those are kind of the big takeaways that I learned through living through the process.
I mean, those are so hard earned. And when you say them, they make so much sense. It's the same way that we would evaluate a restaurant or we would evaluate another business. How happy are the people who work there? How good is the quality of what they're serving? How does it fit within your own expectations? And it makes a ton of sense that these are a lot of the same criteria you'd be looking for when thinking about your sort of housing options. There's one thing that you said around payment and making sure that is matched or aligned to a family. And I think this hits on something that I want to talk to both of you guys about, which is that so many of the families that we see at tendercare, and I was there too, I just assumed that so much more was covered by Medicare, by health insurance. I quite frankly was shocked at just how much is actually private pay or out of pocket. And I'm just curious, Dan, if you could just walk us through, what does this landscape actually look like for families? Like, what should they know going into this? That's going to be really important, when a family is working with UZ, to start to plan for early.
Yeah, that's a big one. And we get that a lot from families where they, they'll ask, and they're just flabbergasted when they hear the answer. But, doesn't Medicare cover this, or doesn't insurance cover this? And it largely doesn't cover assisted living. Medicare does cover short-term stays in skilled nursing and rehab hospitals, but it's limited, and there are co-pays after a certain amount of time that can get very expensive. So, and then there's Medicaid, which people often don't understand the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. And Medicaid, is for low income. You have to basically have less than $2,000 in assets and earn, or your income has to be less than about $2,800, $2,900 a month. And so, that's an option only for, after you've used up all your resources. So yeah, that's a big one that a lot of families, really don't understand. And we try to educate. And there's folks out there that actually try to steer families towards Medicaid and protect their assets, which, every situation is different, but I would say that in general, a Medicaid facility is not going to be the same quality that a private pay facility is going to be. And that's just purely economics. I mean, private pay, they're going to have higher budgets. They're going to have, be able to pay their caregivers more. And so it always kind of concerns me a little bit when somebody is trying to go directly to the Medicaid route, because that's not necessarily the best care for their loved one. So,
So it's so illuminating, because I think so many families come in expecting, they get confused. They think, they've heard that some things are covered. What they don't realize is the distinction between Medicaid and Medicare. They don't understand the different quality differences, the preferences. And so this all ends up with sticker shock, I think, at how much it can sometimes cost. Even in, I grew up in the Bay Area in Northern California. My dad, who's living with Alzheimer's, that's a very affluent area in the Northern California Bay Area. And memory care in just 30 minutes north of the house that I grew up in is actually around $34,000 a month out of pocket. And this is not something that, unless I had been spending so much time in this industry, I would have been prepared for in thinking about financial modeling and forecasting and how to plan for this, and working alongside my dad on how best to deploy his reserves and his resources. And so I just think if I can just ring an alarm bell for all families, these are critical pieces of data to be able to understand. That starts with having these conversations, with planning, with working with incredible professionals like you, Dan, who understands, okay, don't go just for the shiny object, go for where the best teams are, where you've got the most dedicated, most high touch, personalized care. This is so vital. And so I kind of want to switch over into, best possible scenario, designing the best experience for aging, for choice, and what that looks like. And just ask both of you, if we were to kind of wave a magic wand and what this would allow for, Z, I'm curious, walk me through what a family who has decided to work together with you, with a professional, to start to put together a plan. What does this unlock for them later on when they come to a point in the road where they need to go ahead and work with someone like Dan?
Yeah, I do think about a few of the clients that we work with here, and I would say I'm going to target first, really thinking about the working adult child. And so what we saw, for example, with one of our Connecticut clients is he was seeing that mom was declining. He lives nearby. His brother lives in Colorado, so he takes on a lot of the responsibility for being close by and the things that go along with that. So one of the things he looked to do was move mom's accounts first, with the idea that it's easier to manage all of this if we can see it and it's here. And the client service and hand holding that we do is really what he wanted for mom and wasn't seeing from the current advisor. She had questions, he wasn't necessarily answering or calling back, and so they couldn't get a lot of detail on what was actually happening. Not that anything bad was, but they just couldn't get answers. And so from the point of view of being able to help a parent, where a child has the ability to influence the parent or is actually helping out, can use that as a leverage point, listen, I'm going to help, but I need you to go along with the plan. So in that way, it's really helpful because we can get the parent in. They're going to see a whole level of service they probably never encountered because advisors didn't do this in the past. This wasn't necessarily an issue, 25 years ago, but today it is. And so what we were able to do is talk about mom's long-term care policy and what that will look like when it's triggered, if she needs it at home or she decides to move. She did do tours, so she knows where she wants to go and what that cost looks like for her locally. And it's very disparate. So I think even within Connecticut, overall, it may be, thought that it's much more expensive, but where she's living in the Northwest is actually a much better situation. So I think having that in place, mom knowing that you're not going to run out of money. But then also one of the things that we were able to do, and I think this is really important, is look at her bucket of money and figure out where was the most tax efficient way to pull funds for the basement renovation they were going to do to accommodate a caregiver living on site. And that's a place where, whether we put the plan in place or not, we've made money by simply creating a plan. And I think that's where what I would recommend to anyone hearing this discussion, whatever age you are, if you have not planned for this type of stuff for yourself, never too early to start the conversation. And depending what decade you're in, whether 40s, 50s, 60s, it's really Dan and my job to help you have perspective on what you should or should not need to have in place at this time.
That's amazing, first of all. Just even that level of planning and understanding what contracting looks like and what the tax advantages are, that feels like that's level 10 in terms of preparation. I'm curious, between the two of you, is there agreement on this? You know, in terms of where to start planning first? Is it financial health? Is it having the conversation around options and preferences for where to receive care later on? Like, which comes first, Dan, Z, and which do you, like, is there a sequence you think is the right one, or does it change dependent on family?
Well, I think that the financial discussions should happen first. One of the stats that really shocked me that I think you had shared was, you know, that families or folks with cognitive decline 6 to 7 years prior start seeing their funds reduced. And I didn't realize that it happened. I know it happens. I've seen it. We see it every day, but I didn't realize that it was happening that much that early in the process. And so I think the financial plan is kind of the first step, because the situation is going to change in 5, 6, 7 years when they need to go into a facility. And I think that's a more short-term decision. So I feel like the estate planning, the financial planning, that should be, happening well in advance. And those families that do that, for us, they're the dream clients. They, everything, they have all the choices, they have the power, they have the options. It's really easy to work with them because there's a lot less stress because they know what they're doing. They're not limited by a budget per se, or if they are, they know what that is. And so, that's really, I think the order that it should happen.
I definitely think that it's important to know what you can afford so that you can set expectations, because one of the things we never want to do is have someone go into a situation thinking, I'm going to go shop in this area and then only find out it's really out of their range. But I want to point out, this is an issue for everyone, including wealthy families. The issue is not so much the affordability, it's the conversation. I think that as a culture, we don't talk about money. It's very faux pas to talk about it. And so those important conversations really have not been happening. And I think now you have a generation of aging and adult children that have seen what it looks like with their grandparents or parents. So they're planning now in advance. But what I find really interesting too is we oftentimes think about planning in the beginning of a task or in our careers. We know, hey, you got to start your 401k really early. The difference between starting at 22 and 30 is literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. And by the way, it has nothing to do with anything more than time, which is a free resource. Time brings value, and having that time to plan. So I think it's interesting. We do a lot of planning in the beginning, but we treat retirement like an end, and it's not. It's really a new beginning. And we know, again, MIT Age Labs has done a ton of research that on average, you're going to have 8,000 days in retirement. That's 22 years. So we really look at it again as a new beginning. This is a brand new chapter, really 4 chapters and stages we see that we're going to plan for. And I think when you start to look at it less of an end and more of a beginning, it positions it for a plan and for setting down and really having goals. So one of the things we utilize and that we'll offer for anyone that's interested is that we use a workbook from MIT Age Labs that walks them through 4 stages and the things to think about. And I would challenge any 50-year-old who's wanting this to be the last 10 years in corporate for themselves, like, this is what you should sit down and think about now while you have 10 more years and you're saving and still working. how do you want to tackle this issue when the time comes? So I think really thinking of retirement not as an end, but a beginning is an important shift that we need to make as a society.
Wow, that is not something I've heard often, but it's so true. We spend so much time on setting up and really thinking through what the original structure is. Very little on how we get much more proactive about our retirement, even though so much conversation is around how do you want to spend your retirement? What does that look like? We should be putting real infrastructure underneath a lot of the dreams and putting equal effort, I think, towards that. It's something that I think it's hard for families to do. We're resistant to it. Like, I speak from experience. My dad never wanted to retire. And so planning for it was difficult for him because it wasn't an outcome that he wanted. And so it's hard in a support role as an adult child to really help nudge a family member into more of this proactive planning if it's not something that they like to dwell on. So I like the original tip too of divulging my own plans and my own expectations and what's really working for me as a way to bring the ball a little bit further down the field, even when you might have differing attitudes about what level of planning needs to happen. It's going to be better for everyone in the family. So I think that's really important.
Just one additional piece to that is, as you're bringing up on doing my plan, you can bring up things that you're hearing that you are wondering if they've heard about. And I think two that are important to help get even someone who doesn't want to retire thinking about this is the widow's penalty and then the RMD squeeze. So the widow's penalty, and it's really widow, widower, but we know we often lose females first, is the idea that once you lose a spouse, you lose your tax benefit of being a joint filer. And so there's a major cost that comes along with just losing a spouse. You lose your Social Security check, and now you pay more in taxes. There are ways to plan for that. And then on the other side, the RMD squeeze is good to know is whether you want to retire or not. At age 72 to 75, the IRS starts making you take your funds out of your retirement accounts. It's called a required minimum distribution. So I would have said to Dad, hey, I am also hearing people complaining about this. Like, have you encountered what an RMD is? Like, are you looking at that? I think you're going to have to take that. Prompting them to do research. I think the biggest thing I should have done when I got my mom's MS diagnosis, and I'm learning it every day still 20 years later, is that it is a string of conversations. You are never going to convince your parent to open up and then choose an assisted living locator, Dan, who they're going to work with, and make that trip. It is a multiple conversation. And so I think letting yourself off the hook on, like, you're not going to walk out from this dinner with agreement. It's really just that we had the conversation and that looks like a win is important for setting expectations.
That's, I think, always anchoring it to money and anchoring it to loss is a really good motivator too. That's a really good pro tip for all of our families. I'm curious, both of you sit on different chapters or different parts of the experience that a family has around thinking about finances, financial health, planning, thinking about options, placement. I'm curious what the importance or value is of having professionals like you in different categories, both serving the same family, connected might be.
I'll jump in. I think the major benefit is two ways. I think one, I personally benefit because I don't have to be an expert in what Dan is an expert in, but we can still deliver that level of expertise through the network that we utilize. And so in that way, we tell our clients, we're your financial director. Think of it as a quarterback. I'm going to remove you from being the translator between the two because that's not your job. We can save you time and mistakes by letting us all work together. Or if you want, you can step out and let Dan and I work directly. We're happy to work on your behalf and come up with these results. And I'll tell you, when I work with someone like Dan, it happens a lot faster when we can just speak directly to each other and remove, the things that aren't important and really focus in on what are we trying to achieve and how can we do that.
That's great. Dan, how about for you?
Yeah, I think there's the biggest advantage is continuity in all that planning that happened. It makes sense that, that we get tied in with the other trusted advisors on that team. Because that's what we are, is a trusted advisor. We're helping them, and advising them on one of the biggest decisions that they are going to make. And so that continuity between all the planning that Z helped them do, over the previous however many years, we can help, translate that into the actual execution of that. So, and I just think that it doesn't happen enough. I mean, it's kind of my new mission is to really get out there and talk to the other folks in this trusted advisor kind of industry, whether it be financial planners, fiduciaries, estate attorneys, and just really share that that desire to collaborate on these situations, because it does make all the difference.
Well, it's such a great experience on the family side too, because if we're on the receiving end of all of this deep expertise as part of our extended crew, our family, who can rely on different professionals that we trust, we know are there to give the best possible set of options and choices to our loved ones, it just means that we can actually deliver on what we're attempting, which is just to provide incredible care to our loved ones, and to do that leaning on those like our incredible trusted network who are working together to be able to help make that possible. You're right, Dan, and it does not happen enough outside. That's why we're on a mission to do this. I was on the phone with my own father's financial advisor early, kind of trying to figure out what options were available. And Dan, it would have been really useful to have you in the room, because there was not that connection to what this meant in terms of creativity and how to think about, how different choices would lead to different planning for, what made sense for his own portfolio. And so I have lived through this firsthand, what is like when that connection and that sort of baton pass of expertise doesn't happen. And so it's incredible that we have these types of connections happening here. And I'm just curious, if there's other inroads you'd like to see happen for ways that families can work across professionals like the two of you that would lead to ultimately more comfortable, better outcomes.
Yeah, I think I think communication, getting families talking about, these things is really the catalyst for that. Right. And Z touched on it, and I'm going to steal a few things that you've said today, Z. I love flipping the script. I think that's that is a great way to, just help kind of start the conversations. And I've never thought of it that way, but that's a great tool that I'm going to share. But the other thing that you said, and we tell our clients this all the time, because a lot of them ask us, like, how do we start? How do we get? It's usually the dad. Dad doesn't want to go into assisted living. Dad thinks assisted living is the end of life. Dad thinks assisted living is, the old-fashioned nursing homes that he probably visited his, grandparents in when he was a kid. And what we tell our clients is that it's not going to happen in one discussion. It's not one conversation. And I think, Z hit the nail on the head. It's a string of conversations. You're not going to solve this in one discussion, one time. It's got to be it's got to be an ongoing effort, and I think that's the key to starting these discussions. And then that leads into, okay, well, where are your finances? Who's helping you with this? Have you thought about that? The RMD squeeze, have you thought about, long-term care insurance. I mean, folks that have long-term care insurance, whether it be, traditional long-term care insurance or life insurance or annuity with, with long-term benefits, those tools are just such a game changer when they're, when it comes time for us to help them. And I'm definitely not an expert in how those financial tools work, but I just know that when they come to us and they have long-term care policy or they have long-term care benefits, it really frees them up with so many more options and choices.
It's so true. And we actually have some amazing trusted network members who can help families with long-term care insurance. So definitely another very important piece of the trusted network and what families can expect in coming through and being routed to the best professionals at tendercare. I want to, first of all, so grateful for your time. I know how busy both of you are, but I kind of want to leave on just a rapid fire 1 to 2 takeaways that you hope every family takes away from this conversation and brings back to their own family that you wish you could spread to the wind. I'm going to start with Dan.
Communication. Start having the discussion, start the planning. We tell families, get a binder going. It's important to understand where those accounts are, whether it be an electronic, type binder in the tendercare vault or the old school 3-ring binder, whatever works. But get that together. And then, just understanding what mom and dad's wishes are, what their, what makes sense for them. And I think that's having that as kind of a baseline is a great starting point.
It's great. Z.
Yeah, I think if you're sitting here today and you're a working daughter or son that's helping your aging parents and you're feeling frustrated and this is all good ideas, but I just don't see how I'm going to put it into practice, I think number one, if you're worried about tackling the finances, know that for most folks, their largest asset still remains their home. And I know that mom and dad oftentimes want to stay in that home and age in place, but if they need care, we need to help them see how they can utilize that asset to afford for that rather than feeling like they're going to have to wallow away at home alone. So this is, again, it's not just a wealthy people can take care of this issue. There's a lot of creative ways that we can find cash flow and turn things into income for a client that needs care. I do think, to Dan's point, it's all about communication. And so again, if you're a frustrated daughter or son sitting here and you can't get your parent to talk about it, flip the script. And I'd also challenge you, call an advisor or call your current advisor and ask them why they haven't talked to you about this and that you want to start having that discussion. Because once you put it on paper for yourself, you're going to feel a lot more confident to poke holes in your parents' plan or to have a real conversation around, hey, this is what I'm doing and this is how I'm going to save money or make money on this. I think, again, people are always inspired by stories, whether real or not, on how people are making money, or saving on taxes. So I definitely think having that conversation, and especially as the son or daughter of an aging parent, the number one step you can take is starting this for yourself, which is going to really build your confidence and credibility to continue having that conversation with your parents.
So important. I'm curious, any family would be lucky to work with either of you. We know this at tendercare because we've already gone through the incredibly deep family bar vetting for both of you. You're both top of your category. I'm curious if you can just do 1 to 2 sentences on, for any families, when should they reach out to you and why?
I think as soon as possible is best, because I would tell you from age 20, we came up with a really easy way that we can plan to make lots of money. At every single decade, there's different things we're thinking about. So if they want to reach out, we do have a nice piece on one page that shows each decade, what are the 3 things you should be thinking about and planning for now in advance of the next decade? And that goes again from 30 all the way up to 80. And then we also do have, again, that MIT Age Labs workbook. So if, again, your daughter or son having a hard time bringing up the conversation, let that piece guide the conversation and be a leave behind after you have dinner. That conversation can almost kind of continue while you're gone and stay present with them by utilizing that brochure. So again, that's a free resource we offer. And you can feel free to call our office at 203-883-1654, or feel free to send us an email, z@damefender.com, and we're happy to set up a 20-minute complimentary discussion.
Amazing. Everybody should take advantage of this. And that's national, right, Z?
That's correct. And we do sell long-term care insurance, by the way. So we can help with that as well.
Dan, how about you?
There's really no bad time to reach out to us. I think that when there are questions around senior care, we encourage people to reach out. We pride ourselves on, we're not just placement agents, we're senior care advisors, and we can help point and educate and share what we know about the senior care community, especially in the Phoenix market where we're at. Whether it's, costs, what are for long-term planning, whether it's, care options, skilled nursing facilities, hospice, home care. These are all things and folks that we have great partnerships with, that we work with on a daily basis. And so it's never too early to reach out and start the process of understanding. And we're here to help. We're always happy to chat with people and share what we know.
That's great. Dan Henderson of Assisted Living Locators. I am so grateful for the time with both of you. I think if there's a few takeaways for families, this doesn't have to be scary. Plan early. There's so many incredible professionals like Dan, like Z, ready to help and step in, have the conversation, give guidance. This is so much easier when you accept help and when you have alignment before you need it. So please use all of this insight. Please reach out to Dan or Z. They're both phenomenal. If you have any other questions or need more help, you can always come to trytendercare.com and find help. We'll route you to all of our incredible trusted network members across the country. We'll leave you with this, I think, biggest takeaway, which is flip the script. And I think that doesn't just go for flipping the script on, your own plans, but just flipping the script on our approach to this entire chapter. I think this can be designed. It can be amazing. And I think by approaching it that way and reframing it, it just gives so much more options to really enjoy this. So excited to do that. There's so many amazing sort of key experts ready to help. So please reach out, ask questions, and make sure to go ahead and take advantage of all these free resources. We'll go ahead and drop these at the bottom of the comments, so you'll have them in easy access to both Dan and Z. Thank you both for being here.